Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. I'm here today to share what is always one of my very favorite videos of the year, my TBR, and plans in general for Victober. And this year, I thought, was going to be especially exciting, since this year I'm one of the hosts. I had all sorts of plans for the month. Not only all sorts of amazing reading, but filming videos and costume, discussions about my favorite teas, etc. I'll talk about that slightly more near the end of this video. But unfortunately, I may have to be off booktube for almost all of October. Again, I'll talk a little bit more at the end of the video about how I might handle that. Quite early in October, much earlier than I thought, I'll be having shoulder surgery on my dominant side. Apparently, the surgery has a fairly drawn-out recovery time, starting with high-level pain meds that might leave me a little too loopy to talk about literature. And my shoulder and arm will be completely immobilized for at least 6 weeks, it seems. And I'll be sleeping in a recliner rather than my bed for several months. In addition, I'll have a couple of physical therapy sessions every week for at least 6 months, with an expectation of that recovery might last a full year or more. To be honest, just the time I'll have to spend at appointments this coming month is a little daunting. I'm hoping for the best case scenario, that this surgery will actively reduce my current pain and also increase my mobility and functioning. But the main goal really is to prevent further deterioration. As I heal from surgery, I'll have my e-reader as well as my phone with me so I can read Victorian classics digitally. In addition, I've found a great number of my choices and possibilities on audio through Hoopla and Libby, as well as through LibriVox, sort of the Project Gutenberg of the audio world. And I have a couple of things from Audible as well. I don't usually listen to a lot of audiobooks, but I've been practicing a bit in the past few months when I just want to lie down and close my eyes and not even hold up my e-reader with my non-dominant hand or turn my head at all. But let's put all that to the side and talk instead about what I'm planning to read and to listen to during October. Initially had a more extensive and more adventurous reading month in mind, but I've decided to focus primarily on rereading, and specifically rereading old favorites that bring me comfort and yet also still make me think in new ways every time. I do have something new on tap and some extras that I would love to be able to add on if all is going swimmingly, but we'll see. One of the new to me books is the Victober group read, Hester by Margaret Oliphant. Although the group is planning to read 2 chapters per day, which will take about 3 weeks, I might try to read ahead a bit before I go through that brief period where it sounds like I might be quite high on painkillers. The novel sounds just wonderful, about the young Hester and her older cousin Catherine, both of whom are strong women who are often at odds with each other, from what I hear. Catherine has an unconventional position for a woman, a position which allows her to look after her family in what might be a surprising way. Although I haven't read the novel yet, I gather it meets a significant number of the 10 Victober challenges, and that could be handy. As I go through the challenges in this video, I'll mention Hester again, where it might fit in, but I'll go ahead and say that I think it will work for Elizabeth's prompt, Marissa's, Kate's, Catherine's, and even my own challenge. So let's go through the challenges in a bit more depth. I'm not going through them in exactly the order in the Victober list, but instead in an order that kind of fits my choices. First is Kate's challenge to read a Victorian book where friendship is featured. As with most of the prompts, just a huge number of books would fit here. The relationship between Hester and her cousin in the group read might answer it, even though the 2 women are often in conflict. But I want to include a different book, my favorite book of all time, which I reread frequently, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontes. Friendship braids through the novel in interesting ways, but I suspect all readers of the novel will be especially affected by the friendship between Jane and her schoolmate when she was young. Now, some of the old timers on this channel might be laughing. My spouse used to tease me that I should fit some discussion of Jane Eyre into every single video on my channel, given that I just naturally was coming so close to that goal anyway. And some of my regular viewers have suggested that they could enjoy a nice drinking game by taking a sip with every mention of Charlotte Bronte. All of that is true, but I've never actually done a serious discussion of the book on my channel. At this point, when I pick up Jane Eyre, I often don't even read the book in its entirety. Sometimes I'm merely dipping into the text while searching for particular scenes. Fairly commonly, I read as much or as little as I need to soothe myself in hard times. But on this particular Victober reading, I want to read Bronte's novel as a whole, in order. My longer-term goal is to make a whole series of videos about the novel, basically a deep dive, perhaps in the early summer. I thought it might be nice to read it this month, though, with the goal to think about it anew as much as possible, and to think what big themes I might want to discuss in that early summer deep dive. Steve Donahue has suggested that I should name my little project June Eyre. We'll see. My Victober challenge is to read a work that discusses education, and Jane Eyre certainly addresses that issue in a variety of ways. Jane goes from learning at home on her own to school to eventually becoming a teacher, etc. If things go extraordinarily well this month for me, I might pick up another of Charlotte Bronte's novels, Eliot, which I have not read in decades. And it also addresses education in yet another way. The next challenge I'll mention is Marissa's, to read a work of Victorian literature where a character experiences a change in class or social status, from social mobility or rags to riches, fallen women, etc. I gather that Oliphant's Hester will address this challenge pretty well, but I think I'd like to read another favorite novel of mine, Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. The shifts in Tess's social position is a central theme in the novel, echoed even in the title of this book. Just this month, I've strongly recommended it to 2 other booktubers, and yet it has been a while since I've actually read it myself, long enough ago that my memory is not as sharp as I would like it to be if I were to have a discussion with them. To say that Hardy always brings me pleasure might sound quite strange if you know the morose nature of much of Hardy's work, but it does. There are few books that I find as absorbing as Hardy's Tess. Incidentally, Tess also explores how her connection to friends plays out over the course of the novel, so it would meet not only Marissa's but also Kate's challenge. All right, Elizabeth's challenge is to read a work by an underrated Victorian woman writer. My plan is to meet this challenge with Margaret Oliphant's Hester, although I do have some other lesser-known authors that might appear in later challenges. Milena in her challenge suggests that we spin a color wheel, either a physical wheel or a digital one, and then pick a Victorian book of any edition with a cover that features that color. I got purple. Until very recently, I don't think I have ever had any purple books, but I recently got a very special box in the mail containing a set of purple volumes. I know what is in the box, but I haven't opened it yet because I want to film an unboxing soon if I can. Because of my shoulder, I'm going to need a friend to help me do that, I think. But while these books are related to the 19th century, they are not specifically Victorian. In her suggestions video, Milena listed several imprints that release covers for classic books featuring fairly vivid colors. So I searched through and found a Penguin English Library version of Anthony Trollope's The Warden. Now, I've read a few Trollops, but not yet either the Palliser series or the Barsetshire series, with the exception of The Warden. This is a very strange thing, given how much I loved The Warden, but I figure a reread of this lovely book will be a great starting point for actually reading the other volumes, starting with Barchester Towers, perhaps in November. Catherine's challenge is to read a Victorian book that has a connection to Jane Austen, who wrote a few years before Victoria rose to the throne. I've heard that the group read Oliphant's Hester would qualify, as would Trollope's The Warden. There is something so gentle in The Warden, not the gothic darkness one sees in parts of Jane Eyre, or the misery we see in Thomas Hardy. That gentle approach to the main character, including gently making fun of him sometimes, seems quite Austen-esque to me. Austen can be quite sharp in her teasing, but at heart her sharpness is always part of a larger sense of a community that has to find some way to get along with each other within reason. I think we see something similar in The Warden. On to another challenge. Roy suggests we read a Victorian work of fantasy. And for this one, I think I'm going to read Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, partly because it is fantasy, with its creation of a different world where the rules don't always seem to make any sense to us, but also because Alice in Wonderland meets my education prompt in a wholly different way than what we see in Charlotte Bronte's works. Jess challenges us to read a Victorian work set in a different era. I think I'm going to try Elizabeth Gaskell's story/novella Lois the Witch, about a girl sent to New England in the U.S. to stay with family after her parents die. Eventually, she's accused of witchcraft in a time and place, basically mirroring the events of the Assyria in Salem, Massachusetts. It sounds fascinating to me as a person interested in the social history of the United States. Lois the Witch, since it is a short story or a novella, depending on whose perspective you accept, will meet Katie's challenge to read a work of Victorian literature that is not a novel, i.e. a play or short story or poem or nonfiction. I do have quite a long list of alternative possibilities that will respond to Katie's prompt, though. One is the nonfiction work Life in the Sick Room, written by Harriet Martineau. Since I will be in something of a sick room myself during Victober this year, this volume might be of special interest to me. The final of the 10 challenges is from Roz, who asks us to go empire spotting. That is, to see how many times we can spot signs of the empire in our Victober reading. I'm looking forward to searching for references to empire-related settings or characters who've returned from such settings, but also, as Roz explains, whatever characters in general are eating or drinking, sugar or tea or rum, for example, what their attitudes about others might be, and what they're wearing, like draping cashmere shawls over their shoulders or carrying lacquered canes. Roz even points out that one impact of the empire was on language, with loanwords from bungalow to pajamas. In other words, the British Empire affected people on all sides in a variety of ways, including culturally, and it affected people raised in Britain who never thought to travel outside of England, too. Well, that's the reading I hope to do. If I find myself in a position where staring at a screen for a few hours feels preferable to picking up my e-reader or turning on an audiobook, I might devote some of my Victober to watching screen adaptations of Victorian novels. I would love to see the old adaptation of The Pallisers by Anthony Trollope, which I believe is available on YouTube. I might watch the miniseries of George Eliot's Daniel Deronda, which I haven't seen since the year it was first broadcast in the U.S. Please, if you have other favorite adaptations to recommend, I would love to hear down in the comments. And speaking of comments, I fear I may not be leaving comments on your videos or responding to most of the comments very well on mine after the first few days of October, at least for a bit. On the other hand, I might have much more time to watch videos and read your comments than I usually do. And I promise that a huge number of the videos I queue up are going to be related to Victober. Let me thank you in advance for providing me with that lovely nerdy pleasure. All right, at the beginning of the month, I plan to post a video or two. I had hoped to schedule a few upcoming videos, but I'm not sure I'll be able to due to my current shoulder limitations, but also the prep work I need to do to get ready for my surgery and the long recovery. Depending on how things are going, I might be able to put up a few check-ins sometime after I'm home from surgery. Another possibility for the early days, before I feel ready to film myself, is that Steve Donahue has offered to talk me through some discussion videos, all centered around Victober, where he would do the physical work of filming, which is minor, but might be hard for me at first, as well as any thinking that might be necessary when I'm on heavy painkillers. I'm very grateful to him for the offer. Another person has also offered to film a Victober-related video with me, and that might work out in late October. We'll see how things go. You know, I initially felt bad about having to pull back on all the things I wanted to do for Victober, and I still do in some ways. For example, a few years ago, I featured a little segment at the beginning of each week where, usually in a Victorian costume, I showed you one of my favorite teacups and told you about its story, and then talked to you about the particular kind of tea I was drinking that day. I think that was during the pandemic when my son was home from college and had just introduced me to 2 different American brands, Harney & Sons Fine Teas and Smith Teas. This year, I requested affiliate links for both companies. For those of you who don't know, that does not mean these videos would be sponsored, but just that if viewers were to click on my link, I would get a small percentage of the purchase price back at no cost to you. And Harney & Sons was so generous that they sent me a few samples too, including their famous Victorian London fog. I hope to be able to share at least a couple of those brief moments of tea time early in the month, but I'm afraid it will be far more limited than I was hoping. But back to feeling bad about pulling back a bit, I really don't, because I know you are all in great hands for this coming month with amazing hosts and also lots of participants who've been active in Victober for years. And of course, a lot of incredible authors. Some we might have loved for decades and others we might be discovering for the first time. Happy Victober to one and all.